First this morning, the new property trap. In an exclusive investigation, homeowners who bought their properties under complicated leasehold deals have told this programme of spiralling costs and a fear they'll have nothing left to pass on to their children. Those affected don't own the land their houses are built on. And in some cases, that land is literally being bought and sold beneath their feet. The government says it's about to announce radical proposals to overhaul the system. Our reporter James Longman has this special report.
Hello and welcome to Taylor Wimpey's How to Make Your Move. We can't buy it, we can't sell. I honestly don't know what we'll do.
It's the biggest mistake I've ever made.
It just seems immoral and completely unethical.
This is just an attempt to dupe people into a very uncomfortable position.
We all know there's a housing crisis in the UK. Not enough homes, with many priced out. To help Generation Rent become Generation Buy, new homes are going up across the country. But, new or old, are you buying a leasehold or freehold home? And do you even know the difference? It's a very old system.
Britain's first factory-made show house, prototype of the $500,000.
So what's the difference? If you're a freeholder, you just own your home outright.
We've got modern established period thatched.
Lounge.
But you can also lease your home to someone else. That's the leaseholder, who basically rents time on your land.
At this stage, anything's worth looking at.
In recent years, the number of leaseholds has shot up, and there are also more traps leaseholders can fall into. First up, new build developments.
So here's what's happening. A developer builds a house. Here it is. It sells that house to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Here they are. But what it sold is the lease to that house. That's time in it. They haven't sold the ground it's on. That's the freehold, and they keep that. This is the crucial bit. A couple of years later, the developer is then able to sell the freehold, that's the ground that it's on, to an investment company. Here he is, Mr. Investor. It's a way of making money on the same house twice. And here's the other catch. Because it's a house and not a flat, the law says that the developer does not have to warn Mr. and Mrs. Smith that they're going to do any of this. And this whole business is worth hundreds of millions of pounds every year to the developers.
This is Ellesmere Port near Liverpool. It's a development like thousands of others across the UK. But the houses here are leasehold. The developers keep the freehold in order to sell them separately. So people living here are essentially living on ground which is being sold from underneath their feet, and they don't even know about it.
I had no idea that my home would be used as an endless income stream for an investor or somebody else's pension pot, because that's what it is.
Katie Kendrick bought her home from Bellway Developers. She was never told her freehold would be sold off. Now she wants to buy it. The price has gone from £4,000 to £13,000.
Where do they get that figure from?
I have absolutely no idea. I've asked the company for a breakdown of how the freehold is calculated, the methodology to the valuation, to which they've failed to provide me with. They've said that I can either go with it, or if I challenge it, then I have to take on their legal fees to do so. They have said that I can come back with a counter offer, but without all of the information on how they calculate the freehold, how can I make an informed decision how to counteract their offer? So at the moment I just feel completely blind in a corner, and I don't know which way to turn next in terms of taking legal action, but you know, that's all very costly. It's been sold to this new company for 11 months now, and they've made, well, something that was worth 4,000 11 months ago, and now they're doing 13,000. They've made a considerable profit in less than a year, which puts further pressure on me, because now I'm thinking, if that's how much their investment has gone up within such a short time, you know, I need to move quick on this. Otherwise, you know, another year, 2 years, they could sell it on and on and on, and we could be talking ridiculous.
We asked Bellway to comment, but they didn't respond. Homeground, the company that acts on behalf of the freeholder, said its investors were UK pension institutions which bought the freeholds as part of their very long-term investment strategy. They said they were usually willing to informally negotiate a price which can often save both time and legal fees. In the rare event we cannot agree, it added, the leaseholder can use existing laws to force a sale. Lindsay bought her flat with Taylor Wimpey developers. She was originally quoted £2,600 for her freehold. 2 years later, it had been sold on and the price was £32,000. She feels too embarrassed to show her face.
So you got a letter saying that the freehold was available?
Yeah.
But you decided at that time not to buy it?
Yeah.
And then later, what did you discover?
I rang them and said I'd like to buy it now, and they just point blank said it's not for sale. We've got a private investor who's bought it, so it's not for sale. We've got a long-term interest in your property. So I turned around and said, well, I've got a long-term interest in my property. It's my family home. It's my son's inheritance. It's not yours to just line your pockets every year with and be someone's pension fund.
What's been the impact on you of all this?
It's that fear of failure, that I feel like I've let everybody down because it wasn't right to buy it when it came. But nobody said this is a one-time offer. If you don't do it now, it's gone. And it's frustration and anger at the people. It might be legal, but it's not even questionable that it's immoral. And money talks. I can't afford to negotiate with these people. You're talking hundreds and thousands just to try and get a better answer.
What these developers are doing isn't illegal. Some of their buyers just don't feel they're very upfront about it.
Katie and Lindsay say that when they went to buy their homes, sales representatives didn't make much of an effort to explain to them the difference between leasehold and freehold. And in fact, they were told it was as good as buying freehold. So what we thought we'd do was go on Bellway's website, and it's not just Bellway that does this, but we thought we'd go on their website to see what mention they make. And the only thing I can find is this just very simple two-line distinction between what a freehold and a leasehold is. Nowhere on the website are they saying that they're planning on selling these freeholds on.
Taylor Wimpey say that as of this year, the vast majority of its new developments will be freehold only, but many other developers still do this. Beth Rudolph is from the Conveyancing Association.
You've had a little look at some of the paperwork. What has gone wrong here with regard to Katie and Lindsay in their purchasing of their houses?
So when Katie's obviously bought the house, from what it looks like, she's had the right advice from the conveyancer, but it would appear that the conveyancer was unaware of the intentions of Bellway to sell on the freehold. And you've got to have sympathy for the solicitors and any conveyancer in this position, because this is a new phenomenon. It's not something that has happened in the past, that developers would routinely be looking to sell on the freehold.
She came into the showroom, they sort of said to her, this is as good as freehold. But it quite clearly isn't. Isn't there an obligation on the part of the developer and also the solicitor who the developer recommended to tell her these things?
Anybody marketing a property is covered by the consumer protection from unfair trading regulations, which means that if there's something that would impact their decision-making process, then they should be advised of that before they view the property. And this is a really important point. The reason being that actually it's too late at the point that they've moved into the house and to find this out. They need to know before they view the property, before they've thought about where they're going to put their sofa and how the kids are going to get to school and all of that.
The next trap? Complicated clauses.
It's not just developers that leaseholders can feel trapped by. Luke Mosson bought his flat 3 years ago for £150,000.
He'd fallen in love with this Victorian building in Tunbridge Wells. Little did he know, he'd also fallen victim to a growing trend for clauses that hike up ground rent. That's the yearly fee a leaseholder pays to live on a freeholder's land. Luke thought he'd pay £250 a year, which is roughly what most people pay. But 6 months after he moved in, he got a bill for £8,000 instead. A small but important clause had been written into his contract by his freeholder, potentially designed to be overlooked by his solicitor.
On the face of it, it just seems immoral and completely unethical.
And you read the contract.
as much as you
I think
could?
I probably read the contract about 50 times, certainly after I realised, and it didn't matter how many times I read the one paragraph in which this clause is contained, I still can't read it.
The tenant shall be required to pay such annual rent as shall be £1 less than 2/3 of the rentable value of the premises. That was the line that was missed.
That's the key bit.
No idea what that means at all.
Luke's freeholder is Martin Payne. He's certainly not the only person to do this, but we've been told about at least 20 similar cases where he's involved, and he's even been criticised in Parliament.
One crook, whether it's criminal or not is not for me to judge, is Martin Payne, with an E on the end of the Payne.
Luke's solicitor had to pay Martin Payne £7,000 to remove that clause, but it didn't end there. Luke was left with what's known as a doubling clause, something that's become increasingly common in the industry. It states ground rent is £250 a year, backdated to 1990, which doesn't sound too bad, but it also says that that figure will double every 10 years. So by 2020, he'd be paying £2,000 a year, and it keeps doubling. By 2070, he'd be paying £64,000 a year, and by the end of the 190-year lease, there'd be over £65 million every year to pay in ground rent. In total, over the course of the lease, ground rent would have cost more than £1.3 billion on a flat costing just £150,000.
What's your feeling towards Martin Payne now?
It's not great, to be honest. He's caused me quite a lot of stress. I don't deal with him directly because everything goes through my solicitor, but I'm very aware that this clause was inserted into the contract when they extended the lease for no other reason than his financial gain. There'd be no reason he needs to do this.
You look at the wording of the clause, it is clearly constructed to deceive. What we say to all the members of the Conveyancing Association is make sure that if you're advising a client on these clauses, because they can be so tricky, that you run the calculation and that you are entirely sure as to what that calculation is. Because when you sit down with that and spend some time actually looking at it, it becomes very clear that this is just an attempt to dupe people into a very uncomfortable position.
And what we've seen in a lot of these leases and contracts is this doubling clause, doubling of ground rent. Is that something that you see a lot of?
Again, this is a new thing, and if you think what doubling the rent every 10 years actually means in investment terms, it means that the rent will be going up by 7% a year. A guaranteed 7% return is pretty good in this market. And so this is what has created these new investment vehicles that are so interesting to, say, pension funds and other financial investors.
People like Luke freely enter into these contracts, and it's not unlawful. The allegation isn't that Martin Payne expects people to actually pay these ridiculous sums. It's that he's banking on solicitors to miss the clauses and pay him to remove them. We asked him for comment.
We are surprised to be contacted in regards to Mr. Mossam and his concerns, as we have recently agreed a settlement with his lawyer. In terms of the contracts used, these were drafted following professional advice given at the time. We have also tried to arrange a meeting with Sir Peter Bottomley MP to discuss the matters he raised in Parliament, but have yet to receive a response from him or his office.
Last up, extra charges. This is the issue millions will recognise. Freeholders charging for services and repairs that spiral out of control. That's what happened to Scott McCabe from London. Scott and his neighbours were charged £700 a year for gardening. And this is their garden.
Garden in the broadest possible sense,
Yeah, it's not very big, as you can see. I've lived here for 18 years and I don't think I've ever seen a gardener here yet, and they were charging us over £700 a year for gardening.
They were paying £11,000 a year to hire a doorbell system.
Each flat, it works out approximately £170 a year, so I was paying £170 for my little doorbell there that no one ever uses in today's world of mobile phones.
They were even paying hundreds of pounds for old light bulbs to be removed, but the council does that for free. So, Scott and his neighbours fought back. They used a law to force the freeholder to sell them the freehold. So now they run the block themselves.
We conservatively estimate that we were losing £40,000 to £50,000 a year in being overcharged for maintenance items which were questionable at best and maybe not done at worst. We decided that the only way this was going to end and that would to get these people out of our lives and off our back was to acquire the freehold, which I would recommend to any leaseholder out there to seriously consider that. The world changes once you're the freeholder. And that was the best bit of advice we ever got, because the world has changed.
Whether buying from a developer or a private freeholder, leaseholders can find themselves involved in expensive legal battles. It all comes down often to the kind of legal advice they receive. But with more and more leaseholds coming onto the market every year, campaigners say it's more regulation that's really needed.
James Longman reporting. Thanks to Alan for his email. He's in Carshalton. Find out that the lease on our terraced townhouse was sold by the builder to a rich individual for £3,500. No right of refusal for us, so it was a complete surprise. A few years later, when our mortgage was complete, we decided to buy the freehold and succeeded. Total cost with all the legal fees, £16,500. No protection for house owners in England in this respect. Different rules in the rest of the UK do give greater protection, so it's the English leasehold rules which need reform. Are you one of those who's bought your own home, but then it starts to become a nightmare? Thousands of families who've bought leasehold properties in England and Wales are discovering the homes they bought are not quite what they seemed. Leasehold means you own the property for the length of the lease agreement. It then reverts to the freeholder. Freeholders own the property and the ground outright. From spiralling bills to five-figure sums to buy their freehold, many leaseholders are telling us they feel powerless and exploited. The government says it's about to announce, quote, radical proposals to overhaul the system. We played you James Longman's full exclusive investigation earlier. Here's a short extract.
Thousands of homeowners are having the ground beneath them sold off, and they may not even know about it.
What do we want? Homes for Britain! When do we want them? Now!
To ease the housing crisis, new homes are going up across the country. Many are leasehold, not freehold, and the difference is crucial. The new trend is for developers to sell freeholds to investment companies.
So here's what's happening. A developer builds a house. Here it is. It sells that house to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Here they are. But what it sold is the lease to that house. That's time in it. A couple of years later, the developer is then able to sell the freehold, that's the ground that it's on, to an investment company. Here he is, Mr. Investor. It's a way of making money on the same house twice. And this whole business is worth hundreds of millions of pounds every year to the developers.
I had no idea that my home would be used as an endless income stream for an investor.
Katie Kendrick bought her home from Bellway Developers. She was never told her freehold would be sold off. Now she wants to buy it. The price has gone from £4,000 to £13,000.
Where do they get that figure from?
I have absolutely no idea. It just doesn't seem ethically right to me at all. You know, I'm not a cash point for somebody else, and I never realised that I could be used as such.
What Bellway are doing isn't illegal. Some of their buyers just feel they weren't clear about their plans. We asked them to comment, but they did not respond. Homeground, the company that acts on behalf of the freeholder, said its investors were UK pension institutions which bought the freeholds as part of their very long-term investment strategy. But it also said it was usually willing to informally negotiate a price which can often save both time and legal fees. Beth Rudolph is from the Conveyancing Association. We asked her to look through some of Katie's paperwork.
When Katie's obviously bought the house, from what it looks like, she's had the right advice from the conveyancer, but it would appear that the conveyancer was unaware of the intentions of Bellway to sell on the freehold. Anybody marketing a property is covered by the consumer protection from unfair trading regulations, which means that if there's something that would impact their decision-making process, then they should be advised of that before they view the property.
I feel guilty for my family that I've made that wrong decision. You know, it might not impact on me now in my lifetime, but you buy a home for your children to have, and you know, to give them something, you know, and it's a massive burden to leave for your children.
For Katie, this is a property trap from which she still doesn't know how to escape.
Let's talk now to Louise O'Riordan, who recently bought a new build house as a leasehold property in Bedfordshire. Piers Gibbon is here, a leaseholder from East London. Sir Peter Bottomley is a Conservative MP. We've got Rico Wojtulewicz, who is from the House Builders Association, and Daniel O'Doherty, who's a solicitor who can hopefully help us make sense of some of the complicated law here. And some solicitors and conveyancers don't come out well, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Louise, you used the government's Help to Buy scheme, bought a new 3-bed end-of-terrace property in Dunstable. Did you know you were buying a leasehold property and what that might mean down the line?
Hi Victoria. We did know after the second appointment that it was going to be a leasehold property, but no, we didn't know what that meant. We were actually told by the salespeople that the land was owned by the local college and therefore that it was safe land, that it wouldn't be sold on. That was the implication. That's not actually what they said. But now I've just found out at the weekend that actually they own the land, the developer.
Right. But it's a 499-year lease.
It is a 499-year lease, so hopefully I won't be affected by any downfalls. However, I'm powerless over the amount of rent and how often they increase it and by how much. Also, it makes...
What's the ground rent per year at the moment?
At the moment, it's £200 a year.
Okay.
It does increase with RPI, but I don't know how often that is. That's not clear in the contract.
Did you ask? If it wasn't clear, did you ask? Did the solicitor ask? Did the conveyancer ask? Did anybody ask?
No, to be honest, we're first-time buyers. We're mature first-time buyers, but we are first-time buyers. We were relying on the solicitor, obviously, to point out anything that we should have been aware of, and nothing was flagged, nothing at all. We thought we had nothing to worry about, and now, at the moment, we're worried that you know, this issue is emerging. We're just finding out about our situation now, so we don't really know the full details as of yet of how, you know, negatively we might be affected or positively. But we could end up with a house that we can't sell on if we want to sell. We could end up with negative equity if we want to buy the leasehold, the freehold, sorry. It might be way too expensive for us and put us in negative equity. You know, there's so many ifs and buts at the moment.
Stressful, Sir Peter Bottomley, isn't it?
It is, and it shouldn't be. And you have to remember that everyone is a first-time buyer once, and they're normally dealing with developers who are in this business in the long term. And I say to those developers, watch your reputation and watch your bank balance.
Well, that's what they're doing. They're watching their bank balance.
I tell you this. On the 27th of April, 2 major developers have their AGMs, Taylor Wimpey and Persimmon. And if by then they're still trying to defend these scandals, then I think they'll find that their shareholders will revolt against them.
Just explain why you say it is a scandal.
Well, let's take the habit of selling houses as leasehold when there's no reason to. If they own the land, no house should be sold as leasehold. Number 2, no house or flat should be sold with ground rent from a reasonably high level, doubling every 10 years. That's an increase of 7% a year. Now, some solicitors don't realise compound interest, but they ought to. And if I bought a house, say as a first-time buyer, and wanted to sell it after 7 years to move somewhere else, for a job or better house or worse house, and the solicitors for the incoming purchaser said, don't do this, you'll find that your £200,000 house is only worth £100,000 because of these onerous ground rents. They are scandalous. And I'll give one last point. Bob Bessel, who's developed many of the retirement homes, says the ground rent doesn't buy anything, so he charges a peppercorn. Now, nobody minds paying out peppercorns. We do object to paying out £200, £400, £1,000, £2,000 and so on.
One of the companies we've spoken to says by doing it this way, it raises up to £500 million a year in capital for developers to build badly needed homes.
That's rubbish. Absolute complete rubbish. It's just using the cash machine. Louise used the expression the cash machine, and she's absolutely right.
And you're laughing, Piers. Why?
Sure, it's hilarious. I mean, the idea that ground rent buys you anything, it's rent for nothing. It's classic rent-seeking behaviour by wealthy property developers and freeholders. And they take money off me for nothing. They very graciously allow me to breathe the air inside my leasehold flat, but not much else.
You chose to buy that lease?
I did. I went in with my eyes wide open because my girlfriend and I looked around at the London market and we realised that if you want to buy an apartment in London, quite often, well, that's the only things on the market. So you have to buy a leasehold. So, OK, we accept there are some drawbacks to that. But when you get into them and you realise, oh, my Lord, this is legalised cabal, scandal, ridiculous rip-off.
So in what way have you been ripped off?
Basically, we are charged by the freeholder for ground rent for nothing. OK, that's £250 every year. But there's a more important and darker thing going on, which is that the freeholder is able to employ their choice of managing agents to do the day-to-day management. Yeah. They're allowed to employ their choice of insurance company as well to insure the property. And it's only when you do the most basic sort of internet search you realise that the same names are appearing on the boards of directors.
Did they tell you?
Oh, no, they don't tell you. Of course not. You have to do the work yourself. I've become an unwitting expert in something I never cared about until I found I'm a victim of a rip-off. So you find this, you know, the management company has got the same people. It's the same people involved in different businesses, all charging a little bit extra every year for what they then don't do.
Right. So without naming names of companies, because we need to get a right of reply from dozens, you say by working together in the way that they are making even more money.
Yes. We're about 250 flats in 3 buildings in a nice little gated community, and we love it. But when you look at the total amount leaving our little place, our little village, £1.25 million is leaving our block and going off somewhere in Uxbridge to a couple of PLCs. So we look at our block and we see things falling down and things not mended and all the rest of it, and we're thinking, for £1.25 million every year, where's my jacuzzi? Where's my valet parking?
Yeah.
Now, I don't want any of those, but I want a solid investment.
Yeah, and you also don't know what commissions they're taking on the insurance which you pay for.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And when I rang the insurance company, because I saw this bill, I was going, oh, and I said something like, oh, my gosh, this looks like you're taking a backhander. And he went, oh, you've got to be very careful with such accusations. We are independent, we are regulated. And I said, I'm so sorry, that was very rude of me. It's only later I find out that you share directors with the managing agent and with the freeholder. So, yeah, it looks like a backhand.
Rika, you represent house builders, from small businesses to the multi-million-pound developers. You're not coming out well in this.
Well, we represent SMEs, so small and medium enterprises. So some of them will build up to 250 homes a year, but it's not a model that we're used to, and it's not a model that businesses put forward. And the reason is as Peter says, is reputation. And not just reputation for making sure your business is well received, it's making sure that you get repeat business in the future. Many people come to our developers and say, we represent over 900 developers, and they say, we need your homes, we want your homes on these sites. If this isn't a new trend, not in any way, it's just the new trend is that volume developers now build the majority of homes, so therefore it's coming to light, and actually that's the real problem for us. And we discuss regulation, and we always believe in good regulation, and if measures have to come about, then they have to come about.
Right.
But over-regulation is a problem for our sector.
Right, but just be clear what it is you're proposing, what you're suggesting in terms of the law, to absolutely make it illegal to when you own the land to sell it as leases.
Three quick things.
Yep.
The first is ban the sale of leasehold houses if the freehold is available.
Yes, yeah.
Second thing, get transparency. If people won't do it in public, they shouldn't do it at all. And once they start getting the spotlight publicity, a lot of them are going back rather fast. And the third thing, rather longer term, is to change the law so that you can build common hold rather than leasehold, which means the freeholder, the developer passes the control of the managing agents to the leaseholders themselves,
right,
who can make their own appointment.
They can choose. Does that sound like over-regulation?
Sounds very sensible. What I would say is that sometimes plan developments are conditioned, and that requires a management company to take control. In the respect of SMEs, we like to keep hold of that leasehold. You know, members of the National Federation of Builders will keep hold of it because they can maintain the gardens, or they'll sell it to somebody that's reputable.
If the leaseholders agree that,
Yep.
that's fine.
Fine,
It should be a
okay.
leasehold decision, not somebody sitting away saying,
Sure.
ring the bell, where's the money?
Yeah, Daniel, you're a solicitor. Solicitors and conveyancers also don't come out of this particularly well. I mean, it's, you know, solicitors are not reading these contracts properly.
Well, I mean, the first thing I say is I'm from a firm called Amplet Lismore Solicitors, who are part of the Conveyancing Association,
Right.
who have been lobbying for change.
Meaning what? Lobbying for change to get your members to read the contracts properly on behalf of their
change to the
clients?
conveyancing system as a whole, which includes changes to leasehold law. For example, with leasehold flats, which are subject to the Leasehold Reform Housing and Urban Development Act 1993, for a lease extension, the legislation requires that the lease is extended by 90 years, but that a peppercorn ground rent becomes the ground rent under that lease. So why should it be any different for freehold premises?
Yeah. But do you accept there are some solicitors not really working very hard on behalf of their clients?
There's good and bad everywhere. I know that we do a full report for leases, for leaseholders.
What does that mean?
Well, I do lease extensions, so where...
What's a full report though? I mean,
So
is there like a half
reporting
report
on
then?
the service charge provisions in the lease, what the ground rent is, what it is now, what it's going to be, who's required to insure the building, what the repairing obligations are, all of those main functions.
You're specialists. And
Yes.
there is. He talked about lease extensions being reset with the ground rent of virtually nothing.
Yeah.
There is a Payne I named in Parliament who actually wrote new leases, informally extending leases, doubling ground rent, but back to when the lease was first granted in 1950. So a couple might buy a flat for £70,000 and then be hit with a ground rent of over £1,000. They complain, they're told, sue your solicitor. Well, the lease is written in such a way that you have to be a very experienced solicitor to find the terms mixed up in the middle of this long bit of verbiage.
And also you have to have a lot of money to sue anybody, let's be honest.
That's why I think that the government needs to step in and the Competition and Market Authority say some of these terms are so unfair, they should be unenforceable, and then those who created them lose out a lot.
Victoria, I will just say that the way we deal with with work like this at Amplet Lismore is my department is not a conveyancing department. So if there is a leasehold element to the conveyance, that gets passed over to my department, which is a specialist department. And that's how it gets dealt with properly, and the clients are fully aware of what they're committing to.
But you want government to act, don't you?
I think it needs to, particularly in certain areas.
What are you going to do? I mean, what would you have done differently, knowing what you know now, Louise?
This is it, exactly. There needs to be more transparency. We were not made aware by either the solicitor or the developer that the leasehold was not available. We thought that the land was actually owned by somebody else. Had we had known all of this, we probably wouldn't have bought that particular property. We would have gone outside of that area and found something cheaper that was freehold, that we could have more power and control over. At the moment, we're thinking, are we even better off in a home that we own? Because we might have been better off renting. That might have actually been cheaper in the long term. We just really don't know what to do. It's all, emerging for us at the moment. We're only just establishing what our position is, and it's just, it's come as a big shock, actually.
Okay. You said you're very happy where you are, but do
we love it. But we had to get together a campaign to find out what our rights were. So we had to go to solicitors.
With neighbours and so
with
on.
neighbours, we needed to find out that we have a right to manage and a right to buy our own freehold. And before we got the people together and realised that we can exercise these rights, we were utterly powerless. And we had a very visual demonstration of how non-powerless we are now, is that we had a meeting with the managing agent on Tuesday night. And for the first time, all 3 blocks all walked in together to that meeting. And they could tell immediately from the body language, these people know their rights, they know what they're talking about. And we are hoping that they're in the last chance saloon at the moment. We are hoping they will see the light, realise that publicity is going to be very dangerous, and actually start behaving like decent business people.
And Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, the charity, their website, LKP, Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, have gathered these things. If you've got a scandal, let them know. And if you want to seek help, look on their website and ask your MP to get involved, because the government is beginning to move, and we can move a long way.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming on the programme. Thank you. Good luck. Thank you.